Let me see. Yes, thank you so much. It's super great to be here. As I said, I am not a business person, and I'm not a more of a technical. I have fully technical background actually, but I still believe and think that I can bring you guys some more knowledge and inspiration on this topic. And would love to have questions at the end. So feel free also to pop up questions as I speak. So in the chat. And then I can try to, at the end, go through all of them. And also very happy to reflect upon any question you might have on any topic relating this, because trust me, I have a long list of things I would have liked to have in this, in this discussion, and all the different use cases for technologies and so on, but I'll try to keep it still overviewable, understandable. So yeah, so I'm here today to talk about how I believe founding a company or a startup, or specifically a climate tech startup, how that can actually improve sustainability of the world. Low key, high ambition here. Let's see if we can move. Nope. There we go. So first, a brief introduction to myself. I'm Gyri, whatever you want to say. It's very open for interpretation. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Tanso Technologies. I'll talk more about what we do and who we are and so on later down. I am fully wholeheartedly a data and AI nerd. Have been working on a special intersection of climate change and sustainability and data for the last couple of years. Actually, I realized my first appearance on a conference or speaking on stage regarding climate change and dating and digitalization was already 10 years ago. So it's been a while. I am, as you can hear from my funny name, Norwegian. And I was about to say that means that I'm pretty obsessed when it comes to hiking and all nature and so on. I also grew up 4 kilometers from the nearest neighbor on a farm. So I have, my background has this type of like nature vibe to it. And unfortunately, both my parents are biologists, meaning that I learned a lot about nature growing up and a lot about ecosystems and how the world functions and our dependency also, and how small we are in comparison to the big wild nature world out there. Added some logos at the bottom. It's, just for the fancy logos to have them there. I think my experiences that I've gotten throughout the life are big and small and cannot be summarized necessarily in 5 logos at the bottom. Most importantly, the Tanso logo, but as I said, I'll get back to that one. So what are we going to talk about today? I wanted to make this quite interactive, or at least try to get your perspectives and get my breakdown my view on sustainability and digitalization, and of course also entrepreneurship in this. How can a little mosquito make a big difference? And I think to start off, we need to go into what actually do I mean with sustainability. I know you guys have been reading through or gone through a lot of presentations when it comes to corporate sustainability or responsibility for businesses, but sustainability is quite bigger than that. And as I said, having biologists as parents, you get imprinted from birth a little bit that nature is important, but I'll get back to that. Then I also want to go into what does that mean when it comes to entrepreneurship. And I think here for you guys, I'm not sure how much experience you have with entrepreneurship and VC and, this entire ecosystem that you have of risk capital. But I think I can make the case based on the numbers that climate tech and technical solutions is the shit. And unfortunately, in my opinion, I'll get back to why, they will actually die out and will now no longer be there in a couple of years. And then, as I said, I want to go a bit through my experience as being a founder and how the first time I was asked by my co-founders to join them, I said, hell no, and thought that was the stupidest things you could do, and why I changed my mind. And last but not least, I'm very happy to go into any parallel that you might want to discuss more in depth. So feel free, ask your questions, and we'll hopefully have a good discussion at the end. So what on earth does sustainability mean? I think it's important that we start with a fresh slate. What is it according to how we look at the world at Tanso and how we think about it? And with that, we start off with the 3 pillars. You have probably seen this before with the 3 different pillars of sustainability. You have social, economic, and environment. I think of it as like a history change where you have quite a lot of focus on economic profits, starting off all this type of value creation, wealth, efficiency, and profit and loss. And then in the last century, we have seen more and more of the social aspects coming up, and where you also those matters, meaning you have unions, you have human rights, you have equal pay, work-life balance, and as you see, there's a huge topic about how technology has impacted that, but that's a different thing that we don't want to talk about. And now we see more and more focus on environmental. That means toxic waste, that means ozone layer, that means GHG emissions. It also means pollution. So it's also health and environment combined. And with that type of these 3 sustainability aspects, pillars, as you can see here also on the illustrations, is literally taken from Wikipedia. So it's not a very high credible paper source in this topic, but it's just the basics. It means that sustainable development, as said the first time it really properly was used, means that you meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Side note, Brundtland, so the first UN Secretary for Sustainable Development or Environment, I'm not 100% sure what her title was. She's Norwegian, big fan of her, first Norwegian prime minister. And sustainable development in a nutshell means that we're able to have our values, have our good lives, have our good planet, or whatever you want to call it, have our profits, but for a long time. And maybe to give that, whoops, that was wrong, right? Maybe to have a look here at the right. Here you see economy in the middle, society and environment. And I want to highlight that we see environment as the outer thing. And as the outer thing, being environment, is some topic or something called, or we have something called planetary boundaries. It's a topic that comes from more the environmental side of things, really science, environmental sciences, but also risk, which means that where are we when it comes to planetary boundaries? At what point in time do we go outside of the boundaries that the planet has and therefore start compromising the fundament of capacity that we have to live off of, basically? And here you see, and this is taken from the Rockström, I was about to say from Johann Rockström in Berlin from the Potsdam Institute. And as you can see, we are fairly orange and somewhat red at quite a lot of them. You see climate change here, we're not too far yet, but it's still a question of at what point can we not turn back? We also have like novel entities, that means plastics, for example, and different types of materials that already is not recyclable. There's not a sustainable circulation basically in the world around it. And we have a 6th extinction going on, killing biodiversity as if it was like flies, but insects is a good example because they actually die like flies. And there's a lot of problems that we currently are not environmentally sustainable, meaning if we wait a couple of years to do the same thing, and we will at some point go out of the bounds of what is our fundament of living. So that's the environmental outer bound. But then you have also a term that I just wanted to bring up because it's something of kind of the worldview that we have at Tanso, is the donut economics. So how do you make sure that you actually stay within the bounds of environment, but also foster social and societal, basically, positive change? And this came from actually came from a group that tried to eradicate hunger or poverty. And like, how can you make people thrive while also staying inside of the environmental boundaries? And maybe to look at it like this, if you have the three aspects or the three pillars, you can kind of see them as growth opportunities or different metrics. So if financially you're doing great, the numbers goes up, you have a lot of profit, you have a lot of value creation. If environment is going up, it means that you have better biodiversity, you have less climate change, you have stable conditions so that we can operate well. Same with poverty. If you the poverty of social, you have better human rights, you have more equality between genders, you have all the different types of social metrics that you can have when it comes to social. And actually measuring these and then saying, let's see all of them. It's more complex than just looking at one. And if you take only the economic aspect of it, of course it's easy, it's plus and minus. We make money or we lose money, or, you have a bit of money, you invest it, you project it, you think, okay, going forward, it will make sense. You're looking at competition, all the different financial aspects of it. But if you only look at that, you have so many externalities coming in, and now more and more with climate change, that, for example, climate risk is a thing. If your company breaks down or whatever because of a flood, it's an externality that you want to internalize, and you want to make sure that you can keep track of it and actually measure it. And that is somewhat this huge trend that we're talking about, to create transparency for this complexity of, like, how I see it. As I said, I'm a data nerd. It's a mathematical equation, right? Are we doing plus and minus on every single aspect? And are we kind of doing a trade-off for the environment for more financial gain? Are we doing a trade-off, or are we getting both in one solution, or all three of them in one solution? And this type of three metric system is something we call it triple bottom line, and where you have those as kind of your success factors or KPIs. And where, as a fundamental question, you can ask in life, what is success for a business? What is really, at what point can you say my business is doing great? And if you say your business is doing great because you're making a shitload of money, but you will be bankrupt in 2 years because that money is not actually there, you're just, burning through them, every single gorilla case, or you can call it, but all the VC cases out there that actually are financially sustainable. They're just taking VC money, feeding it in, burning the money, going through. Sorry, off topic here, but it's a bit of a question: what is success, and what is when is the company actually a company that is doing well? And for me, and for a lot of others, it's not only me, it's not something I came up with, this triple bottom line, or keeping track of how the business is doing with these three metrics is, how happy are my employees, has a huge impact if you get the smartest talent, has a huge impact if you want to retain good talent. For example, environmentally, now it's also very much interlinked with, if you're having a great sustainable and environmentally sustainable strategy of how you are going to be a front runner later down the road, trust me, it will be worth it. It's not only me saying that, it's many others. And then, of course, long-term financial stability will be somewhat secured because you have great talent working on solving the problems that won't be jeopardized because of climate change, or because of biodiversity loss, or because of any other environmental aspect. And therefore, these three topics as one is something that we need to consider. Easy said, and then done, I was about to say, especially because it's a topic that is not so, it's not so easy to necessarily see by itself. It's hard to track this. And for some countries, just as an example, New Zealand, for example, added this into or swapped their GDP for this happiness index, where they say, okay, let's focus on happiness and well-being and environmental factors, not only profit for a country, because how well is a country doing. On a side note, there's, for example, I'm sure you guys have heard about factfulness from Hans Rosling, the Swedish guy, Swedish doctor, the Gapminder Foundation. He has a point where it says that the US might be making a lot of money, but if you look at their health score, they're the sickest country of the rich countries. But if you look at Mexico, they're the healthiest country of the poor countries. So it's kind of like there are metrics here that you can play around with. And if you don't look at it as a whole, you would say the US is the best country in the world. But if I go to the US, I will get sick and die. Yay, I will be rich, sick, and dead. Yeah, that's how is that relevant, right? So it is something about daring to look at the full picture, seeing the status quo. How am I doing on every single KPI and not only the one financial one? And as my good guy, Larry Fink, BlackRock's, investment fund manager, he says, climate policies are all about profit. It's not about being woke. This guy is a money-making machine, and he's here to make money. And he says, if you're not taking climate and sustainability seriously, you're financially dead in a couple of years. It's all about money projections, in his opinion. How I like to think about it, instead of just optimizing for the one, and therefore that's the motivation to optimize the others, I'm kind of like, why not optimize all of them and be happy going forward? Yes. So that was a bit the introduction to sustainability, and very high level, because I don't want to bore you guys with something that I'm not an expert on at all. What I'm, on the other hand, more into is the combination of using tech and to solve climate problems. Something that I have been doing for a couple of years already, especially with images like this. So I've been working a lot on using satellite imagery to monitor and verify and report on climate that too, but especially on carbon offsets. So how do we make sure that the carbon offsets that you try to buy when you feel bad about taking a flight to Mallorca for your Easter holiday, when you buy that carbon offset, how can we make sure that it is actually high quality? How do we make sure that that is good? And for me, that makes sense to work on. It's a good thing. It's super cool to work on super smart people. But I think that those solutions only make sense to work on. Like, this is my personal view. Only makes sense to work on if you can scale them. And for scaling, you need money. And I think a lot of money is what we're going to talk about now. Why climate tech currently is the shit, and why they will actually die out as a concept. Let's see. So first, a little bit of climate basics. I'm not sure how climate nerdy these people in the audience are. I'm very much a climate nerd. I know way too much stats and calculate them back and forth, which makes my everyday life quite miserable, because the stats are looking very bleak and dark and gloomy. But in a nutshell, we need to reach 1.5 degrees to stay within the green zones of the planet boundaries when it comes to climate change. And that means that we need to decrease by 50% by 2030. We have 8 years. That's less than my nephew is old. And I still remember when that guy was born. If you think about it, 8 years ago, that was 20, I have to calculate, 2014. And 2014, I still remember me, like, I was the same, and we need to decrease by 50%. And just to have said it, in total in the world, we haven't yet reached the peak. So like, we're still going upwards, and we need to cut 50% in 8 years. I'm optimistic, but terrified. We want to get to 2050, 100% net zero. And for that, we need two things: technology and innovation, because a part of our projections to come to 100% by 2050 also includes a lot of technology that we don't yet have. So we're kind of like making models saying that, oh yeah, we'll figure it out along the way. And somebody has to figure that out. And in order to figure that out, as I said, scalable solutions need money. And that's a lot of money, actually. It's not just a little bit, it's a lot of money. And as you can see, we're currently here per year when it comes to how much money we're spending on climate solutions or climate finance, if you want. But it's projected that we need to be, taking a bit of bigger leap. Positively seen, though, this is happening. We are getting more and more money financed into this to solve it, but it's still, a lot to go. Oops, that was interesting. Yeah, there you go. So maybe first, what is climate tech? To go more into depth, what are actually the definitions of climate change or climate tech? One aspect is to directly mitigate or remove emissions. In this case, climate tech is very much focused on carbon emissions, the drivers for climate change. That is not to say that there are environmental aspects outside of climate change. There are also, like I said, biodiversity aspects and so on. But climate tech is focusing on directly mitigating or removing emissions. It can, secondly, help us adapt to the impact of climate change, because climate change will happen. It's just about a question of how are we going to adapt it. That could be flood securing or flood helping for Germany. It can be better Autobahn. It can be better paint, even to some degree, for the houses to not get leakages and so on. It's a lot of cool things happening. But lastly, it's to enhance also our understanding about the climate. And here is a lot of research being done in academia on how can we have better climate models, how can we have better improve our mitigation or even improve our understanding for what will happen, where will things happen, and for example, also doing hurricane predictions or wildfire predictions and so on to be able to detect when something is happening in a more accurate way. But we're currently seeing a lot of venture capital going into climate tech. I actually don't have the most recent numbers for the last quarter of 2021, but as you can see, things are going up. A lot of money is going in there. There's a reason when Larry Fink says this is the new thing that you need to do, then a lot of other funds and also investors are going into it. And you also see the number of climate tech startups are increasing. It's not only the funding going into them, and there's a lot of money, as you can see. And here you see it's not all. Let me see. I just need to move your heads around. But as you can see here, there's a lot of different topics, and especially mobility and transport. As you can see here, the gray one. But also the bigger chunks of where the emissions are actually coming from, like industry manufacturing, is also increasing in where they get money to find the solutions, because you realize you need to reduce. There's money in making reductions happen, and therefore the money is flooding in where it should flood in. I added this one because I think it's a good reality check as well. We can make the case that, everything's going great, money's going in there. But if you look at this one for a second, this is where the IPCC says that the climate mitigation potential lies and where you can have the most CO2 reductions. And here you see the venture funding going into it. As you can see, EVs are pretty cool. You invest a lot in them, but that's also not necessarily where the most innovation is needed and where the most investments are needed. In comparison to, for example, reforestation or ecosystem restorations, where it's such a huge mitigation potential, but it's not as sexy and it's actually a more difficult problem because nature is not as easy to manufacture as an electrical vehicle, for example. So just a reality check. So on a side note, yes, things are moving in the right direction investment-wise. We are making a lot of new innovations, and there's especially also a lot of deep tech funds coming up doing direct air capture, for example, that want to do really, really carbon essential innovations a reality. But the thing is that climate tech startups are not only here to save the world, they are mostly here to make money. And at least that's how the VC world look at it. And as you can see here, innovations need to happen somewhat early on because you need a bit of a new innovation. It takes time to actually implement them and actually figure out how are the maturity of the innovations that happen. And when you look at the energy sector for the emissions that come in there, it takes a bit of time for the readiness to get them up to a mature level where you can actually use them. And you see also, and this is why my left-hand side here, the climate tech startups that are out there are also increasing in terms of value, how much money they make. There are actually more climate tech startups now that are unicorns than this number here, because there was just a couple of them more than in the last couple of weeks they got funding, because this is taken from the last quarter, and that means that there is a lot of money needed into the different single innovation strategies, more than a SaaS company. So if you don't need for like a small software, you don't necessarily need as much money or funding to do the innovation part as you would need for more deep tech solutions, because the innovation is higher, meaning that you will see going forward higher investments without the same type of growth or scaling, because it will take more time to actually get up there. And there are still most of the climate tech startups that are unicorns as of now are more mobility startups that are kind of low tech, if you want. But that, I believe, will change. And this is because of the gigacorn. I'm not sure if you heard of the term before. It's coined by the gigaton of CO2 equivalents and unicorn, meaning a gigacorn is a company that has achieved lowering or sequestering CO2 emissions by 1 gigaton per year while being commercially viable. And this is a perfect example for combining the two, environmental sustainability with financial sustainability, and how you can actually put money into sustainable solutions while having that in the back of your mind. This is also financially needs to be sustainable over time. It takes time to develop it, but here it is. I wanted to add one more thing before going into my own kind of climate tech journey and the use cases that we have at Tanso. And that is that climate is more than carbon, and that it's so much more, like we talked about, especially environmental sustainability, but also social sustainability is much more than just carbon. And that even while doing research on forests, so you're looking from images of forests, and then you want to figure out how much carbon is in this forest and what are the projections of in the next years, how much will this be? It's easy to calculate carbon. And that's why we're focusing so much on it as humans, because, you know, what is it to say? What you can measure becomes important, or something like that. Or what you measure becomes important. So make sure that you measure what is important. And it's easy to measure carbon emissions because it's such, like, it's a CO2 molecule. Think about it. It's a very tangible, like not tangible actually, but it's very present compared to how would you define biodiversity, for example. It's harder to monitor that in the same degree, and also hasn't gotten enough funding. And therefore, I would urge, just as a last note, yes, gigacorns are awesome. And I really want to be the first European gigacorn coming out of Germany. But it's also much more, and our ambition is also to see this as a holistic picture going forward. What are the other aspects that come in to become an actual sustainable startup and an actual sustainable solution out there? And for that, you need to have, as I said, all KPIs into account. But I see this as a huge transition, a positive way of saying, okay, we're taking more than just GDP, more than just profits and loss into account, and say we need to look at other aspects. So there's a part of it, but just a criticism upfront to my own solution. So it's a good idea to found in theory. There's very low risk. There's a lot of money on the market. We all have great educations, and you know, what is there to lose? You have an upside potential of becoming a millionaire from the one day to another. Why shouldn't you do it? You know, In practice, it isn't as easy, to be honest, even though I have to say I'm still feeling that I'm in the honeymoon phase, still loving it, waking up every day, really looking forward to go to work. So take it with a pinch of salt. I'm sure there will be more ups and downs coming in, but I think of startups in not a necessarily so positive way. I did a honors degree in technology management at the CDTM, so the Center for Digital Technology Management, and heard about it. Did not see a lot of women that I identified with. And most of the guys that are the cool CEOs in Europe, but in Germany, I can't stand. I think they're like, no offense, people, if you guys are successful founders, but I just don't see you guys, could be, but it's not my type of guys. I'm a honest, direct person who likes to call bullshit when a bullshit is due, I was about to say. And I hear a lot of people saying, you know, sustainability, that's like this idealism of, you know, wanting to have the perfect world. Well, I think about startups somewhat the same, but just it's so much egoism. And I wanted to give one point here that one investor told me once. He said, you found one out of three reasons, or mainly one out of three reasons. And it's either fame or status, or it's power, or it's money. So you have status, money, or power. And he asked me, so why do you want to found? And I think this is somewhat you need to ask yourself when doing this. Why do you want to found in the first place? Is it because you want to get rich? If you want, go ahead, be my guest. Please just have the other KPIs in mind. If you want it for the status, which I think a lot of people do, even though they don't want to say it out loud, they want to get the fame. They want to, you know, be on stages, talk and get a lot of cool comments of like, oh, wow, you're my role model. But if I'm being honest, I'm doing it because I want power and I really want to be in a position where I can make a change. And I believe, without sounding too idealistic, I believe that you can achieve a lot by going through founding yourself, but you can even achieve even more by also working for a normal company. So I still don't think founding is the solution to everything, but I think in my case, it made sense. I love Paul Pullman. He's the former CEO of Unilever. He's a super cool guy in general. And he asked, like, is the world better off because your business is in it or not? And if you don't ask yourself that question, like, is the world better because BMW is there? If you have to say, I don't think so, then what is your business doing? Like, what is your business there for if it's not to make the world somehow better, be it, you know, people can move around more easily. Could also be a thing. But if it in total makes the world worse, I would question it. And for me, in my case, I was considering doing a PhD, continuing in academia, nerding out with my fellow super nerds and trying to solve climate change one satellite image after the other. Working together with amazing collaborators and NGOs, and really, like, you know, this idealistic path of using my nerd and tech skills to solve climate change. I even called my paper Tackling Climate Change. You know, that's the level of spirit. And for me, it was important to work on state of the art tech, but also with people who are super smart and ambitious. And I believe that you become the people that are around you, or the ecosystem that you're in, and that you benefit quite a lot, like mushrooms and trees and so on, but we're not going to go into that. But you benefit so much from the ecosystem that you're part of. And for me, I wanted to be part of that ecosystem and try to look around for cool companies to work for and so on, until, whoops, these dudes showed up. And I hate to admit, but two of them are Mannheim alumni. And I got asked by them if I would like to join them and doing this journey with them. And I said, hell no, first. And then I started working with them. And then I realized, these are pretty cool guys. It's actually some guys that I can learn a lot from. And still they have high ambitions. They want to do something that is not just mediocre. Yeah, let's see if we can make a couple of euros and see if it goes somewhere. But, either go big or go home. Go a gigacorn or go home, basically. And eventually they managed to convince me of saying, okay, what's the worst thing I can do with it? Worst case, I learn a lot and I didn't do any harm. I might have helped a couple of companies decarbonize, but that's it. So we have Fabian, who's the CEO. He's a what I like to call Mittelstand muttersprachlich. So he talks fluently with all the companies that we're working with to decarbonize the German industry. Till is a fellow CDTMer from Munich. He's fully financial models and also seeing the analogy between digitalizing finance and digitalizing carbon accounting, because it's also accounting. I'll get back to that. And then Lorenz is my fellow geek and nerd, doing all the DevOps, making sure that all servers run up and running. And I have to figure out the small, simple question of how do we actually decarbonize industrial companies at scale and automate as much as possible. So this is the team that we started off with. We last year got raised a funding round of 1.7 million euros. And now I'm going to give you a short introduction. It will not be super short, I'll admit, because I want to highlight a couple of points, but at least give you an introduction to what are we actually doing and how I believe that carbon accounting is actually a key in order to make sure that we, at a total, make these KPIs transparent for everyone. And that means not only for carbon, but hopefully over time also for every single other KPIs across the supply chain, but also, of course, for investors, consumers, and everyone. And my dream is that every time you buy something, currently you have a price tag on it. But in the future, I would like to have every single KPI. How is this impacting the environment? How is this impacting your health if it's consumable foods? That should be transparent in every decision you make. You need to have the data available and transparent and in your face. This is where it is. So Tanso, we are a carbon accounting management software for industrial companies. We are helping companies through automation to decarbonize. And if, in case you don't know what decarbonization means, it means that you take your status quo, your processes and everything, and reduce your carbon so that you still are financially profitable, maybe even more profitable, that would be best, but still reducing your impact on the environment. And we believe that sustainability is an essential part. So it means that by reducing your carbon footprint as a company, you can also lower your costs and have in the future much more profits and much more opportunities. And these comes from both the OEMs and consumers are currently pushing quite a lot and want to decarbonize, meaning that the entire supply chain are also somewhat forced from them to do it. It also comes from employees, and 75% of employees currently find that sustainability is a priority for their employees or employer, which I think is really, really good. Consumer pressure works, but also in choosing who do we want to work for. It also is a big push from the CSRD, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that is coming, for example, but also other types of regulations, not only in Europe, but also worldwide, that also force, or I would like to call it, encourage companies and institutions to disclose their numbers and make sure that every decision is made transparently. But we believe that the industrial companies, especially in Germany, since so much emissions come from these types of industries, that they, through actively managing and knowing their numbers and reducing their carbon footprint, that they will have much more competitive advantages in the future and make sure they don't go under. And one example there is, I talked all day to Mittelstand companies, or not all day, if I'm being honest, but quite a lot of part of my week is sitting and doing testing, user testings, and so on with these companies and figuring out how can we actually reduce how our best practices when it comes to accounting. Currently, carbon accounting for these companies are like financial accounting was in the 80s, but it's still on paper. It's Buchhaltung, it's bookkeeping for a reason, because it was still in books. And I have to, I love talking to these people because they're so engaged and just like, how do I do it? I want to do it, but there's a problem when it comes to data availability and just manual non-existing processes at the moment. And that means that sustainability managers in these companies have to spend so much time on boring stuff like compliance and reporting, than on actually reducing it and being creative, being strategic about it. And I said earlier in this talk that, or early when I came into this call, that I hadn't heard the term digitalization before I came to Germany. And there's a reason for that, because Germany isn't digitalized, There's still, we laugh about it in these calls with the customers of, fucks. And they're like, yes, we know, because we're still using it, and that's the level of lack of digitalization that we need to overcome, and where we see that, the entire, I believe that all boring processes is a God gift, because it means that we can automate them. Ford figured it out with the how to call it, the band, whatever you call it, to make the Ford, the T model, because if it's boring, you just get it done. I believe this is the same thing with carbon accounting. Nobody likes their taxes either, but you can automate so much out of it if you have the data collected, if you have the data digital to begin with. And this is where we currently is working on quite a lot to automate the entire data collection process, to collect the data where the data is already digital. So all ERP systems, all different types of business travel emissions and so on, coming from the different systems, taking all that in one place, doing transparent calculations, meaning also emission factors. You guys don't know what that necessarily is. No worries. It's basically just a number that you calculate the emissions coming out of 1 kilo of steel, for example. But all that calculation part is also overwhelming if you're someone who has never done it before. But that's where we can come in and actually do that automated, where one use case, for example, is to take receipts or bills and automatically take the numbers from them and add it into the system and just ask for approval. Hey, is this correct? We found the kilowattstunde or kilowatt hours in the bill. Is this the consumption that you had on this bill? Is this true or not? And then you can avoid the entire manual tapping. There was one engineer who told me once, Gyri, humans have defects. And I kind of agree that it's often that manual input are wrong and you add another zero and, then the entire calculations is wrong. So rather do it digital, don't mess with it, and then it's proved. But also another use case for using technology in this case is to automate when you have already big SAP line items of 1.5 million, for example, different line items of things you have purchased, you should be able to automatically assign and calculate emissions based on that without having to manually, copy paste or add or whatever people are doing currently. So you'd be surprised of how many emails are being sent around, how many, also Word. I don't like Excel, I get why people use it, but Word. And it's just because this is a process, this is a new, it's called category creation. It's a new category of processes internally in companies that hasn't yet been standardized or streamlined or created. And therefore, the leapfrogging that I like to call for the developing country, Germany. So the leapfrogging of going both digital and sustainable at the same time, and not just doing one step after the other. So that is about what is problem. I also wanted to highlight that there are a lot of intransparency for a good reason. So one thing is the intransparency of the emissions. So the scope 1 and 2, I won't go too much into it, but here are examples. Scope 1 and 2 emissions that directly come from the companies themselves. That is somewhat transparent. You will be able to find that electricity bill somewhere. Somebody printed it once, or it came through the mail, or it's in somewhat system. But what is very hard to model, and harder at least to have a control over, is the supply chain. And if everyone nicely reported their scope 1 and 2 emissions, so their own emissions, then the world would be a nice place, and we could all calculate how much our chocolate bar has of emissions, because the entire supply chain, and it's super transparent. Unfortunately, we're not there today, and there are ways of modeling and kind of assessing the accuracy and the uncertainty around the emissions that you have in your supply chain, where you need then data science models to be able to do that in much larger degree, because you don't have raw data. So there are two aspects, both automating what is existing and what is already in systems, and then you have modeling and doing data science, assumption-based modeling also on the entire supply chain. Maybe one thing that people ask a lot, what Tanso actually means, and that's carbon in Japanese and South Korean, I learned the other day. And for us, it's now a focus on carbon, as I said, where we automate the processes, the boring processes in carbon accounting, and therefore lay the analytical foundation for an effective reduction in the producing or industrial companies. And in order to be able to reduce, in order to make good decisions about using your environmental footprint or your CO2 emissions, you need to know the data. It's like, just imagine trying to do investment based on non-existing numbers. So you don't know if you're actually going in minus or plus. You don't know if you have profits to invest, and then you're just like shooting in the dark. I think this is a good investment, but I don't know if I have the money to actually do it. Or I think this could be a bad investment, and then you realize later on that that's completely wrong. So that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that they have the right data to actually make their decisions correct. And that means that we take sustainability and digitalization together to make the world a bit better place and save time and cost. Through automation, we make sure that everything is error-proof. We make sure that there's transparency in every single calculation. Everything should be auditable by externals if needed. And it also means that everything that is repeated, again, boring tasks are great because you can automate them. Every time you have to repeat something, we automate it. And there's also one single source of truth where all data is in one place, where you always know that this is where you will have all the data in one, and where you can also control your own data and not outsource it to consultancies, for example, or where other people are involved, and where you don't have the control that you need in order to figure out, like I normally say, you need to know your shit, and you shouldn't outsource your shit to others. That's what waste treatments are for, but then you call it waste, and your data is not waste. I was about to say, last point, when it comes to what we are working on, is to identify these kind of hotspots or low-hanging fruits for companies that they can actually reduce. This is not rocket science. As you can see, energy, supply chain, and processes, that's where the emissions come from. But this is currently what we're doing. We're making sure that if you have potential to have a better energy grid mix, why not use it? If you can engage with your suppliers and make sure that they are also more transparent and more open and more using their emissions better, maybe you can also use, like we said about the KPIs in the beginning, how successful is your company? How successful are your suppliers? Can you make sure that your suppliers are reporting on the same metrics that you are? And of course, also processes, making sure that for example, refrigerants, that is a huge emission driver, that you don't have leakages in your systems, because it's just efficiency, right? You don't want to waste when you can have a much more efficient process and a much more efficient company as a whole. So that's high level. Going forward, we're also looking into how to do even better. I didn't show it yet because I thought it would be way too long to go into it, but also using this type of data to go into internal carbon pricing. We already have a model for that where companies can test, if I choose to do this project or create this type of reduction measure, how much would that cost me in terms of carbon? And how much would that cost me in terms of financial money, and therefore reduce it and say, when is the return on investment when it comes to carbon emissions? And same also when it comes to product carbon footprints, and breaking down your emissions on how much is my product emitting and how much can I use that as a competitive advantage. Yeah, this is a bragging slide. I'm not going to go too much into it, but we're cool, to put it like that. The research that we've done at TUM Munich and ADTH, and we're funded by good investors. We also have really, really, really cool people on our team from various backgrounds. And yeah, I find it a bit awkward always to do this slide, but I believe always to say that it's not the team only internally, it's also the external team. So we have a lot of good advisors. We have a lot of people who know much more than we do in this field that we need to learn from. We have our own ecosystem of supporters that are calling with us every week to tell us what is the newest, coolest shit when it comes to tech, when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to the industry trends, and opening doors for us. And that's, without them, we wouldn't be here. And my last 4 learnings before we go into the question round. I believe that entrepreneurship and sustainability is true, that it's something we should do more of. And I want to highlight the fact that technology is a toolbox, but it means that we still need the engineers and developers to actually use the tools to solve the problems. And it's easy to say that you're walking around with a hammer and looking for a nail, and that's a lot of what engineers are doing. But I think the only way we can do it is to work together and collaborate, where you have sustainability experts telling what are problems, we're using the right tools for the right problems to make the best solutions happen. And we need people who actually pick up the tools and get it done. And that's somewhat what entrepreneurs are doing. Second learning, founding is like getting married and having a kid together. Seriously, I spend 10 to 12 hours per day with these dudes. And you have to make sure that you actually love them, and for better or worse, or what do you call it, through thick and thin. And whenever you think about founding, make sure that you love your partner, otherwise it's going to be ugly. And third, innovation is very needed, and founding is definitely an option. But I want everyone to be honest. If you're considering founding, make sure that you do it for the reasons that like be honest with yourself. If you do it for money, be honest with yourself and say that you're doing for money. But you can also be an entrepreneur inside of a company, changing companies from within. I always say I think I would have been a great first hire or something in a startup, because being a founder is also quite a lot of noise and a lot of legal stuff and things that you don't really necessarily care about to get your shit done. Lastly, it's a question to start off the questioning round. Is a business model that doesn't take environmental and sustainability and social sustainability into account, is that even a financially sustainable model? And I have my opinions, but I'm happy to hear yours. And I see that there's some questions already in the chat. Yeah, I can leave this here, or we can go to questions, but always open to send me a message if you have anything that you want to question. If you have any thoughts, I'm always open and happy to talk.